Good evening and welcome to the November 14th, 2017 Radnor Township School District Policy Committee meeting. We would like to, let's see, who are we welcoming to? We've got our teacher rep, Andrea, and our student rep, Andrew. We got Mike Christofko. We got a bunch of people. Dr. Robarczyk, would you like to start with administrative remarks?
Absolutely.
Oh, and Mr. Falcone sends his regrets. He is not able to be here tonight.
Good evening, everybody. This evening, administration is presenting policy 907, school visitors, to the committee. This is the policy was discussed at last month's meeting and is being brought back for a recommendation with the recommended revisions that were made by the committee. And if the committee is in agreement with the revisions, administration is requesting to be placed in the November board business meeting for first read. The second agenda item will be presenting policy 242, student wellness, bringing this forward for this policy as revisions as necessitated by requirements of the federal government and the Healthy, Hungry-Free Kids Act of 2002. Administration is requesting this policy be placed on the November board business meeting agenda for a first read, waive of a second read, and adoption. And then last on the agenda tonight, we'll be revisiting policy 006, meetings and public participation. And as promised at this time, the policy was being moved. At the time that this policy was being moved to the board for adoption, the committee had indicated that we would revisit and allow to reflect on its effectiveness as it was in its original form. We had a couple questions from last month's meeting. Policy 907, school visitors, seem to be missing an explanation that security of students is very important. We did include language now that addresses the safety and security of our students. The timeline for reviewing booster clubs. Administration's in the process of developing an action plan and reviewing sample policy and literature to ensure the most effective practices will be incorporated into the development of a policy. Committee will begin reviewing drafts of a policy after the new year. And finally, will RTSD be removing the valedictorian designation from graduation? At this time, there's no indication the district will be removing the valedictorian designation from graduation. So those were all the questions we had.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Robarczyk. We're going to have public comment if everyone's signed in. I just want to make two quick corrections. We are presenting policy 272 tonight, student wellness.
I did put 242.
You did. You. And it was the Healthy, Hungry-Free Kids Act of 2010, not 2002. Do we have any public comment this evening? See Mrs. Spurtle coming to join us. Welcome.
Good evening. On the agenda tonight, just had a quick question on policy 272 that will be discussed, and that is on page 2 of 272. On the very top, it said the designee shall annually report to the board. This is the individual that's reporting on the student wellness, on the district's compliance with law and policies related to student wellness. And it says the report may include, and it lists 3 different items. Is that something, should that say shall or should say must, or is there a reason why you broke those 3 out? Should it be more definitive than may include? Looks like it's recommended items. Are there items that have to be included in each report? And then on the agenda item which was brought up is the review of policy 006, meetings and public participation, that Dr. Robarczyk brought up. On a couple questions on that. Number one, since it's being discussed and reviewed, it would have been nice to have it included as an attachment to the agenda. There was no attachment of 06. Then we could have reviewed it rather than going back and having to look it up. And I was reading the local paper, the Suburban, in which you post the meetings, and the meetings posted were not the same as the meetings that are tonight. It was showed that the GRCC meeting was not to be this evening, and so it's different than what, this was in the Suburban this week. So my question is, when we come to that meeting at 8 o'clock, is the school district in compliance with the Sunshine Act? And so what I did is just to go back through the Sunshine Act, and in reviewing the public participation meetings and public participation policy 006, I looked at section 4, which is notice of meetings. And the item C under section 4 says notice of all rescheduled meetings shall be given. And in the Sunshine Act, it states must be given. So that's a suggestion that maybe in the review of this policy, you might want to change that, figuring that the Sunshine Act should be the minimum requirement of our policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, we'd like to move on to the approval of minutes. If both of you are okay with the minutes as posted, or if you want to make amendments?
I have no amendments. I'm good.
Great. Okay, then let's begin with, welcome, Mr. Batchelor. Let's begin with agenda item number 4, policy 907, school visitors.
Sure. As indicated during my administrative remarks, we're bringing forward policy 907, school visitors. As we discussed it last month with recommendations for the revisions, were all included, and for further discussion with the hope of sending it for a first read at this month's board meeting.
Tony, is the clean version online or just the red line?
I believe just the red line.
Okay, so if we could just make sure to post both versions for the board
Sure.
meeting, see what kind of changes, if any, come up tonight. But I know that there are some members of the public, and actually some board members, who prefer to read the clean version. I
Sure.
personally prefer red line, but let's have both available. I don't think.
Okay.
Thank you. All right. Amy, do you have any comments, thoughts, questions?
Yes.
Okay.
For school visitors, under the guidelines, policy 916 volunteers is right across from the first sentence, and I was wondering why this policy is cited in here. What does it relate to, and should it be put next to or at the bottom of where we say references?
Which one are you talking about?
Isn't
So
that
the-
P916 mean board policy 916?
Yes. So unfortunately, because of the red line, it does, the adjustment of the paragraph is off. So I'll make sure that's fixed. But we were referring to policy 916 volunteers because this is direct a reference to the whole process of visitors coming into the building and being run, their ID being run through the Raptor system. So that's why it was referenced that it goes along with that process. So it is stated in another policy as well.
So is that the best way to do it? You just mentioned 916, or should there be a more explicit reference that in accordance to the way we manage volunteers, you just put it there and that's the way to do it?
Well, I mean, that's how we generally do cross-referencing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
not every, I personally, I don't think that every cross-reference needs to be referenced in the text. And in fact, there's a validity to keeping it to the side so that, which we've discussed with regard to cleaning up our policies, that Mr. Christofko's, has guided us that if the cross-reference is just in that column, if at some point later we had to change the cross-referencing number, it doesn't necessarily require a review by the board, whereas if it's written into the text of the policy, then that it requires the first read, second read. So, that's the reason not every single thing needs to be referenced in the policy to be cross-referenced in the policy. Does that?
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Gotcha. Okay, so on that same line, school entrances used by the public will be posted with signs. It felt a little awkward to me, and I condensed it into 2 words by saying have signage as an option, just because the fewer words, perhaps the better. And in the purpose, it says the purpose of this, for this policy. I always feel like it's the purpose of a policy
Policy.
as opposed to for, but. The only other question two other questions is on the back where it says parents, guardians may request to visit or ask for education professionals. Oh, no, the title, parent/guardian classroom site and/or education professional visitations. So this, I think I brought up last time, it was just a little confusing to me. My first question is, why are we doing a carve-out in this policy for education professionals? Is it because they are the only visitors who must give 24 hours notice? I'm just trying to see why they are distinct and different from the other, all categories of visitors, because we reference them.
I'm going to ask Mrs. Lesage if she will come up to the mic just to explain this piece.
Welcome. Thank you, Jenny, for being here.
Sure.
You're on already. Yep. Now you're on.
No. Okay. Sorry. The question is why we have educational professional visitations. So typically what happens, and I'm just thinking about it from my point of view, parents can come in, they ask for different classrooms that they may want to visit for different purposes, to look at placement of students. So that's why the parent, the guardian piece is there. Educational professionals, a lot of times they're asking for people that have an educational interest with their child, and these people can be therapists, they can be psychologists, sometimes they're advocates, educational advocates, but they're people that have like a professional educational reason to be there with the parent if, you know, they're looking at it together. So
Yeah, no, I'm not questioning why, and if I may have misspoken. I don't question at all why they would need to be there. What I'm asking is, in the beginning, again, in the interest of just having as concise and consolidated a policy as possible, when we say that school visitors are, I'm trying to find the line here, the board welcomes and encourages visitation to schools by those who have a valid interest. Isn't that everybody, including education professionals? So I was wondering, later, that paragraph then speaks separately to education professionals. So I'm wondering, is there something different about the policy when it comes to education professionals as opposed to everybody else who's mentioned in the front?
So, do you want to answer that?
You go
Okay,
ahead.
so we did, because I think you did, but we talked about this a little bit last month. There is the nature of a professional education, professional visitation is one that's more evaluative in nature versus coming to tour the school, visit the school. You know, so we'll have visitors during parent education week, you know, during education week. And my understanding from administration is that we're trying to strike the balance here of we do welcome visitors, we want them, but in the context of doing a classroom site visitation where they are evaluating the program or how a child is functioning in the classroom, the 24-hour notice gives the school the opportunity to make sure that it's, for lack of a better word, a good time for the visit, and in the fashion that we created in the policy, in the purpose, that it minimizes disruption to instruction. And also the nature of these visits tend to be a little longer, and the specifics of that will be spelled out in the administrative regulations.
Right.
So it really, it's my understanding when we talked about this last month in our planning meeting, Julia, it came down to the nature of a professional, an education professional site visit versus coming to visit the school.
Right,
There's a
so it
difference.
is the 24-hour, like I had said initially, it's the 24-hour notice that makes this need to be a separate
Yes.
designation in the policy from everybody else who would want to visit the school.
Well, I think it depends on the purpose, again, of, and it's exactly what you were saying. It comes down to, a lot of times when it is an evaluative type situation, they are coming to look for something, and that something may not be happening on a day if they don't give us that notice. And we want to make sure that when they do come in, they are seeing what they need to see. So, for instance, I think I used this example last time. Sometimes it's an assessment day, and that's not a good time for someone to come in if they want to watch how students interact with each other, or how the student is grasping the curriculum, how they interact in the classroom when it's a paper pencil test day or something. So that's really what that particular piece is. We do need that notice to make sure that we are giving them what they want. So they only have to come in once.
Yes, I mean, all of that sounds
Okay.
perfectly appropriate and fine and good. My question was just really simple, is why is it separated? And it's because for various reasons, you need 24-hour notice.
Yes.
Which answers the question. The only thing that I would say, though, is that if it's a little confusing, is it reasonable to, first of all, you have in the beginning professional educators, and these people are called education professionals. So there's no definition in the policy. I don't know if you need one, but it was confusing, I thought, a little bit.
But that's just talking about the purpose, because the board does welcome and encourage visitation to schools. I mean,
No, I
I
know.
mean, we could change the terminology to be professional educators, or is what you're saying that you want to change both to professional educators or education professionals in both cases because
Consistent.
to be consistent?
Yeah,
then
I
I
mean,
would.
something.
Yeah,
I mean, I
okay.
just feel like
Understand that.
somebody could say, well, what's the difference between a professional educator and an educational professional? It's just to make it cleaner, that's all.
Let me ask you, which is more encompassing, because not all professionals who come into the schools are professional educators, but they may have expertise in the area of advocating. So what's the more encompassing terminology?
Because I was going to say, as a solicitor would come in, or an attorney would come in, they're not an educator, but they are maybe in
education.
the area of education.
That's right. So I think it
Right.
might be on page 2.
The education professional.
That's right.
Okay. So Amy, was that kind of one of your points, is that we should have that be consistent, education professionals and others?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think that's all encompassing, and it's,
All right.
yeah, I thought it was just confusing using the same words
Sure.
in reverse order
We
in
can
the
do that.
policy.
Great.
It's not a problem.
Anything else?
No, the last thing I had, noncompliance with this policy may result in limited access to the school as determined by the building principal and/or superintendent consistent with board policies. Do you have to cite what those applicable board policies are in this policy, or no? No? Okay.
No, I remember asking, no, we didn't have to. We
Okay.
didn't have to even reference the federal and state laws, but we did just as a reassurance.
Okay, that's it.
All right.
Thank you.
Andrea or Andrew, do you have any thoughts? I mean, we were trying to strike a balance here of being welcoming, but giving the kind of notice that I guess is going to help the district work a little bit, function a little bit better, plan a little bit better for that.
Absolutely.
But do either of you have thoughts, comments?
I just.
Do you want to, Mike?
Sorry.
Yeah.
I agree with the terminology of educational professional. That just fits better.
Okay,
It just fits both sides better.
Right, all right. Julia?
No, we talked about this at length. I think
We
we
did.
captured everything. I think it works well.
Okay, great. So let's make those couple of minor changes that
Okay.
Amy let's make those couple of minor changes that Amy suggested. I count 3. The red line version or the clean version should straighten up the alignment.
Yes.
And do we have agreement to move it forward for a first read? So you have agreement on that.
Great.
And on we go.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Okay, the second second agenda item is policy 272, not 242, titled Wellness. This is one, again, this falls under the necessity under federal government to maintain and bring forward for review among the board. And we kind of cleaned it up a little bit with some minor changes, but overall, for the most, it includes the areas that there's a checklist through the Department of Education and the Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act of 2010. As we were preparing for tonight's meeting, Mr. Christofko did inform us we're missing a couple components that I can fill you in here as we move forward, but also that the details of this are going to be presented in administrative regulations that we haven't had in the past. So we're going to make it in compliance. So we have administrative regulations that spell out the specifics of what's in the policy, so we are assured that each and every year we're in compliance. So if you would look to this policy at this time, basically, as I said, we have the major components, and it's really more about identifying the wellness, that we have a wellness committee, that we have nutrition education occurring, physical activity, physical education, and then other school-based activities, and then along with nutritional guidelines. And as I said, in the specifics of this, the nutritional guidelines and the advertisement of how we offer for competitive foods will be identified and defined within the AR. So I'll take any questions you have in regards to this policy.
Well, before I take questions, so Mike, what's missing from the policy?
Well, there's
You're good.
the Department of Education puts out a checklist that school districts can utilize, right, to review the policy to determine whether it meets all the requirements of the federal regulations. And in my office, we went through the policy, and for example, on the first section where it says policy document, the last item, the LEA updates or modifies the wellness policy as appropriate based on the triennial assessment and other needs. That's something that is not really mentioned right now in the policy. And if you take a look at the second page of this document, there's a whole section that deals with triennial assessment, and that needs to be fleshed out. And there's also another document that's exists that's an assessment tool that can be utilized in the triennial assessment to review the policy that they require. So that's an area where it needs additional information. A lot of this, though, is very detailed mechanical information as to the nuts and bolts as to how things get done. And so as a result of that, a lot of districts are putting this kind of detailed information in the ARs because it's not really a broad policy statement as much as it is like the mechanics of how we're going to go about doing things. And secondly, if you look in the wellness, leadership, and public participation areas, the last three sections there need additional information to be incorporated really through the AR, which is this talking about the wellness committee, document when and how they review the update, the school district will review and update the policy, and also document the efforts to include all the permitted stakeholders in the wellness policy process. That's all stuff that needs to be documented a little bit more thoroughly. And again, like I said, this is all pretty nuts and bolts kind of stuff that's better accomplished in an AR. And the same, there's a few other things on the second page, similar lines.
So for the public notification and triennial assessment, we'll make a general statement in the policy. We'll include that in the next revision of this. And then, again, the specifics of that will go into the administrative regulations.
Okay, so I guess my question to you tonight then is, before we have a conversation about making the changes that are here and bringing this forward for a first read, is that... Are we not going to really still accomplish what we need to accomplish with regard to what you're saying is not in here? Or is this something that, we make the changes that are here because they're required to be made, and then have the wellness committee perhaps take a good comprehensive look at this and the administrative regulations, and then bring this back at a later time? I mean, what's the best course of action with regard to what's needed now for the district versus what you're saying is still kind of missing from this policy?
Well, this particular policy is mandated to be in place, so my recommendation would be to move forward with this particular policy, to put it forward for a first read, and to address the areas which are missing through the development of administrative regulations, so that by the time this policy gets finally adopted, the policy and the regulation could be put into effect. I would not want to hold off and wait on the policy any longer. I think that it should move forward to be adopted.
So do we, and the delegation of responsibilities does mention on page 1 does reference administrative regulations, so we can clean up the details of what you're suggesting because that wording is here.
That's correct.
Okay, great. So then I guess with that, Amy, do you have thoughts? Because I know Julia and I had a chance to speak about this at planning.
Yes. So I'm interested in what you said about the timeline, because this policy is in place, right? It's on the books. So can you just reiterate for me the urgency to get it for the end of November? Is there?
Well, it's actually one that we, was an oversight on my part. Because we got involved with the lunch, was the lunch shaming one. This was one that was supposed to be done by the June 30th as well. So we would like to move it forward in that regard because we want to, again, I don't think there's anything that, and I spoke with Mike prior to this meeting, that there's a couple general statements that need to be added to the policy in itself. But again, the nuts and bolts, which we've never had an AR, which needs to be developed to ensure that we are following all the checklist from the policy checklist based on the Hungry, Healthy, Free Kids Act of 2010. So really, it's not a lot more that needs to go in the policy itself, but more about developing the AR.
I just had sort of one global contextual question about the policy. It seems to be very nutrition-based. And when I think of wellness, it goes far beyond nutrition. So do you have the background on why there's a policy in place? It talks about physical activity and nutrition, but I think of wellness as a more all-encompassing kind of concept. So why, I know it's a boilerplate PSBA policy from 2008. Is there a sense that in this day and age, 10 years later, that there's more to wellness than the pretty singular focus on nutrition and gym?
I would say the only thing I can respond to, and Mike, you can add your comments as well, is going through beyond just this checklist. I read through the act itself, and the majority of the act was even focused towards the nutritional components. So I can't say one way or another why that is. It's more heavily populated in the area of nutrition as compared to physical activity and education, but
and I would just say, it's exactly why what you just said. I mean, when this started, every district 10 plus years ago, I remember, wellness was very focused on nutrition. I mean, that was the discussion, and really, I think the discussion now for a lot of us in education, wellness means something much greater than nutrition. But the laws and the requirements behind what's behind this policy, and the district having a wellness committee has its roots at where it was created. And I remember 10 years ago, a lot of the discussion was about obesity and what we were serving in our schools and what our kids were eating. But I think for a lot of us in education, wellness, you're right, has taken on a much larger definition.
Well, and in a nod to Unionville Chadds Ford, I happened to look at their wellness policy that was revised in 2012.
Most of the terrible administrators have left there now, I heard.
know.
So I know.
So I'm going to indict you on this one, but I think it was actually really nicely updated and did a little bit more of what I was talking about in my previous comment about broadening it to make it a more current policy. I know that we want to move this forward to be in compliance, and we're a little late. I get that. But I know that it takes some time for policies to come back, and I'll do whatever the will of the committee is. But to me, I would rather, if this is going to be in place for any extended period of time, take a look at the way some other districts have updated their wellness policies to make it something that we can live with maybe a little bit longer than.
Just a note, I didn't choose Unionville because they're out of compliance. I actually did look at a couple other ones.
Compliance cycle.
They had to review and it had to be reviewed by June 30th of 2017.
So they haven't done it either?
The revision date was not current, so that was why I didn't reference that one. I referenced a couple others that were actually done through Wistine Pearl in regards to helping other school districts comply. So I reviewed those in regards to making sure we were in compliance.
I'll be sending some fun emails later tonight, so thank you. But I also know that the concept of wellness, though, did change. I mean, the concept of wellness, so there's still the requirement to still do this piece. The wellness at Unionville Chatsford was evolved over a couple of years, a discussion about, wellness of, kids, and there was different activities and even, looking at different committees and actions that took place.
And that's what I anticipate is the wellness committee that's going to get together that will develop will help to put together the more stringent components, the more nuts and bolts of that AR that will spell that piece out.
I don't hear Amy saying stringent. I actually hear her saying more comprehensive. But I think that's probably the place for the wellness committee to do that work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I would also say that, as we, it's already, time is flying. It's already, November as we look and as we, get into the spring and we start looking at setting district goals for the following school year, this is a topic that if we wanted to look at this idea of wellness or what areas or what goals we might want to set in that area, could be another way to discuss this as well.
Yeah, I mean, there are just some things in here that I just feel like we'll be approving this policy in November, and I feel like it's a real throwback the way it's written, and it's hard to.
Or will require.
Yeah, no, I know, but I just was hoping there could be some tweaks between now and the end of the month to make us a little bit more with our finger on the pulse of what wellness is. I'm not saying to go the whole comprehensive version, but I just feel like even the statement promoting student health and reducing childhood obesity will be a primary focus. I'm not even sure that is accurate. I mean, aren't we talking about well-balanced, healthy meals? I mean, the national initiative that came down the other day, of course, it had to do with addressing childhood obesity, but providing kids with whole grains and lower fat things is, I mean, we don't talk just in terms of obesity anymore. So, I don't know. Like I said, I'll do whatever the committee wants to do, but I just feel like we're pushing through a pretty dated policy, and I hope that there is some point in time, a concrete point in time, where we can update this to be much more reflective of our current conception of what wellness is for students.
Julia?
So, as I understand it, a lot of policies that we do are just because. And this is not a great piece of expository writing. It's a just because. Am I right? Am I missing anything? I mean, meaning
Really?
we have to do this.
Right. I mean, we do. I mean, yes.
Right. So my question is, to Amy's point, if this does not reflect what we think that wellness is, what's the downside?
The downside is that the Department of Education will come in and do an audit and find that you're out of compliance and issue a finding that needs to be corrected.
That we're out of compliance because we don't have an up-to-date policy?
That's right.
I think Julia's question
What I'm
is.
saying is,
Yeah, try
if
that
we, thank you.
I think I know what you're asking.
If we, so if we submit this, we'll get the check. If we say, hold on, let's put a lot of work into getting it in a way that we truly reflect what Radnor is with wellness. If we don't do that, if we don't truly reflect what Radnor believes wellness is, what's the downside?
I don't know. I don't know that. So.
I guess the question is why, I'm trying to think Amy's point, why would we bother, putting a lot of our energy and our resources into making something reflect when, if there's no consequence to how it is, I wonder if we should use Tony's his resources. You have limited time, you're a busy guy, and I don't want to make you do projects just because, if there's no driving reason behind it, and I worry that would be. So I'm asking if I'm missing something.
So I do have because we talked about this a little bit. So to the extent, we have a requirement to get this thing done, and, it's, even if we do the cursory pass now and get it in to get back in compliance, that's one issue. And then moving forward to Amy's point and Julia's question of, is it problematic that we have a policy in place that doesn't actually reflect what philosophically we believe about wellness and what, practically speaking, we are doing curriculum-wise about wellness? Mm-hmm. And the only question I would have about that is, because I think then back to Julia's point is, well, then does it matter what the policy says that we would have Tony spend a lot of time? The only question I had about this, and I think I raised it at our planning meeting, is because part of this policy says that we will have a curriculum and program that's designed to educate children, blah, 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 about wellness, to the extent that we might actually have a curriculum that exceeds what we've provided for in the policy, then we're out of compliance in a different way. It's not an issue. Just put your mic on.
Yeah, I don't see that as an issue. So if we, through our audit cycle, if we've done stuff with our health program and our, or in any of our curricular areas that we feel is broadening that definition or addressing issues of wellness, I don't feel that this policy prohibits us at all from doing that. As a school
Okay.
district, we approved that curriculum and we went through that audit, and that this doesn't stop us from doing that in one bit.
Okay.
Which we just did recently.
Right.
With our health curriculum is with being its first year. And you bring up a good point, because I see what Julia, what you're saying. If this would have not even been something that had to be brought up because of compliance with federal standards, and this is 2008, we go on another 10 years with.
It'll all be good.
It'd all be, right. That's what I'm thinking. So I understand what you're saying now. Okay.
We'd be good, but we'd continue as a district to do
District.
the things that we're doing to address wellness
Right.
and those, yes. Is that
Wouldn't
what you-
affect us.
Exactly, wouldn't affect us. We'd continue with whatever, different speaker series we've had, whichever different topics we've had, whichever different presentations, curricular areas, yes.
All right, well, so to tie back that around, because I think this is now going to be able to answer Amy's question. To that point, because in practice, this is not stopping us from doing what we feel is in the best interest of the district, and because to Amy's point, Julia's point, it's given all the other things in Dr. Robarchek's wheelhouse, and at various times with this policy committee, to spend a lot of time working on this policy when it's mostly a compliance issue, and it's not, practically speaking, changing what we are doing from a curriculum standpoint. And I do want to hear from Andrea and Andrew on this, but it would be my thought that this would be a perfect thing to pass and get us in compliance, and then ask the Wellness Committee, which is not necessarily Dr. Robarchek, but a variety of people coming together, and as part of this checklist, it needs to be, we need to have documentation that we have made efforts
Correct.
to include all stakeholders in that wellness policy process, that, in fact, it wouldn't even necessarily be appropriate for just our policy committee to do this, because that doesn't include all the permitted stakeholders, that this is something to have the Wellness Committee work on. They've not, that it's time to constitute that meeting again. And if they come back with changes, there's nothing that precludes a committee from doing work on our behalf, making proposals, and then we review it, rather than us doing all of the legwork, which might not be the best use of this committee's time, for the reasons that you're saying, because it does need to be more comprehensive. Follow me? Andrea and Andrew, do you have thoughts on this policy?
I really like the idea you brought up, Mrs. Goldman, about including kind of more than just like the physical and the nutrition components of wellness. I think with a lot of like the stress students feel, mental health is a really important part of wellness. And I remember learning in elementary school like the three like pillars of wellness: physical, mental, and emotional. So I think to include that in wellness is important. What I'm could you kind of say, all right, this is the policy, voted in, like check the box, and then kind of work on it afterward, kind of like add like kind of some meat to it and have it fit in with kind of like Radner's idea of wellness more after you kind of like do what you have to do?
Which elementary, Andrew?
Ethan.
Ethan.
Yeah, best one.
No comment.
I didn't, but I think I know who did. It's very good. He's the teacher tomorrow morning.
Andrea?
I pretty much agree, actually, with what Andrew said and what Mrs. Goldman said. You guys have really taken a lot of time to make sure that these policies are set. You've taken a lot of time, and all the ones that I've been here for, to make sure that they're thorough. I get that we have to get it through because it has to get through, and I agree that you put it through and let the people that need to look at it. We spent a lot of time to do the health and PE curriculum and redo that and get it all aligned.
So are you comfortable with the concept of doing a first read, but we are immediately
Yeah.
bringing it to the Wellness Committee?
Yes.
I actually have a student in mind who might want to give some input on that a little bit, via email, you don't have to go to meetings. But anyway, all right, there is one, I think there's a slight typo in the first paragraph, just to say regular physical, blah, 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 regular physical activity as a part of the total learning experience. I think the word "as" got out. But beyond that,
I just noticed something else, too.
Sure.
Policy 808, which is the food services policy, is down under delegation of responsibility, and I think it corresponds more with number 2, where it talks about a comprehensive, that the board establishes the policy that the district will provide a comprehensive nutrition program and access to reasonable cost to foods. That's really stuff that's part of 808, not down there, I think. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do. Does that make sense to you?
I just want to go back to read.
What 0808 covers? All right. So I'd like to suggest that we move this forward for the first read with the changes that we've proposed. And I do know that it is a priority that the Wellness Committee be reconstituted and, do some substantive work. And, I have no problem with holding our committee accountable to setting a goal that this is ready in its fully revamped version by next June 30th, and let that be our new 3-year triennial assessment date. I know the reasons that this fell off the radar. It was not really completely you.
So remind me again, what is the timetable that you have to, has to be in compliance every 3 years?
It does have to be every 3 years, but I think if we do a comprehensive overhaul of it in the 2018 year and get it and resubmit it, does that reset our 3-year clock?
I'm not even sure that the Healthy, Hungry, Free Kids Act requires that. Well, actually, it does. It's part of that 3-year review. So, yeah, so we could get this approved, get the Wellness Committee together, put it through its process, and then, yes, that would restart the clock first. Then we would, every 3 years from there, review it. Yes.
All right, do we have agreement on that?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Great. So first read for that. So for our last agenda item, and I was hoping we would have more people here, but Mrs. Spurtle, this is your time. You're on, and Mrs. Dunn. We had an agreement that when we passed policy 006, that after a period of time we would review it. And so the context of the conversation I'd like to have now is to just hear from those members of the public who would like to share with this committee what they feel works about the new policy, and if there's anything they feel does not work for the new policy. But my request is that if you have something you feel doesn't work, that you bring forth a suggestion of how you think it could work better. Or just overall perspective about that. And in the context of remembering, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a word for word of the reading of the policy. And point taken, we should probably have put the policy on the website. And there's nothing that precludes us from bringing this back again at another time. But we had said we would do this, so my apologies that it didn't occur to me to put the policy in the online. It's more a reflective commentary about how is this working? Are we finding meetings to be more efficient? Do people still feel heard? Is the questioning format? I'm just trying to think of some things off the top of my head. And this is a discussion period, so if anyone would like to share, please feel free to come forward. It does not count towards your public comment time at the end of the meeting. This is an agenda item. I am changing the structure for this one. Yes. This does not count as your public comment time, Mrs. Spurtle.
And as Mrs. Spurtle's coming up, I will apologize. I never even thought about attaching it because it wasn't something that was being revised.
Right.
So.
This is more commentary on
Correct.
the experience of various components of
Exactly.
this. And I really am happy to have this be a conversation. We have 10
Well,
minutes
I
or
know.
so.
I know, yeah.
Yeah.
I won't bring my question up until after this.
Okay.
Boy, that's the response to questions by the public from the board and the staff is working much better. If a If the public asks a question, I have yet to see that if there's an answer from the board at the time of the question that the board member responds. That hasn't, I think that's written in this policy during the meeting that's taking place, the current meeting. I think that's in there, and I believe that if maybe there are questions that are asked by the public that none have been asked that the board can answer immediately, but that's the one area. And of course, again, it's the time limit and that was a time limit that was agreed to by everybody in the establishment of the new meeting. Mm-hmm. And unless there's a time crunch, it seems to me that we have been, the interruption is disarming when you're talking.
So that, Mrs. Spertle, because I did really intend for this to be,
Back and forth?
Mrs. Sherry missed her moment in the sun to have it back and forth, because for this limited time, I did want to really have it feel like a conversation. The time limit is a real struggle for us. So when someone is speaking and they're approaching 4 minutes, it's hard to know, are they really, kind of wrapping up or just getting started? And personally, and I can only speak for myself, I personally believe that if we were to give leeway with one person and then stringent with another, I could really understand that one member of the public or another might feel like, well, how come they get to talk as long as they want, but I get limited? And so the concept of really trying very hard to stay to the 4 minutes is just really a comment about equity, so that no member of the public feels that their ability to contribute is singled out. But I guess I would ask you, in the context of an hour-long meeting, when we do have an agenda and there could be any number of people here, how much is the right amount of time for somebody to be able to speak? That's the challenge.
That's the discussion. But in normal meetings, there are usually 2 people, sometimes 3, who get up and talk. So that also could be taken into consideration in the timing, as long as the discussion from the public, the comments and questions are on topic.
So
For
good.
that meeting, on the agenda for that meeting.
Fair.
That's my thoughts.
I mean, and I feel like that's how, I can only speak for myself, that's how we try to run it. So then what happens when the questions are not appropriate to a committee? Or if there's, so would it work better no, hang on, I'm trying to talk through. So do you think it would work better if we said, listen, the first 10 minutes is for public comment? And that may mean that if there's 3 people who want to speak, you each only get 3 minutes. I mean, there at some level, there has to be some way for any person chairing a meeting, whether it's board president at a board meeting or here at a policy committee meeting, or at a committee meeting, to manage the time at hand, prioritize the work at hand, prioritize public comment, but if we don't get to finish a conversation or if we cause another meeting to run late, I mean, it really is a balancing act.
Yeah, I understand. I
Okay.
think we should continue with
Sure.
this meeting and public participation policy as it exists. It seems to be the positive response from the staff and from the board by answering questions. We're actually getting questions answered at the beginning of the meeting. Mm-hmm. That's important.
Okay.
I think that's a key word. We've gone months before in the past. The public has gone months without any answer to a question that
Sure.
we know there's an answer to. So give it a try. If there's a shortened meeting and allow the comment at the end to go longer. That makes sense. We've been in a couple committee meetings that have ended way before the time, not going into the next committee meeting. That's all. So I think my feeling is that you're working with us on it and you are open. The clock has been, the clock individual or whomever at the time, the 5-minute warning has been coming, and that I can see, not a 4-minute, a 5-minute. So whether that was a decision of the board or the staff.
5 minutes? No, I think
It has been, you're up to 5. I've heard that several times in the business meeting. I know it's 4 minutes in the policy, I'm just saying. The clock
I think
has
people like
started.
to try to let a commenter finish their.
You're in the middle of a thought.
Correct.
Thank you.
It's that. Thank you very much for sharing. Is there any other public feedback? Alrighty, well, with that, we will have our final public comment segment. And you can bring up your other hat, great.
Keep it brief, the timer's on.
Oh,
Two comments. It was
Okay.
only one, but now it's two on the wellness policy.
Sure.
I read that as a, and I read it 3 times, Susan, and agreed with the crossing out of the as. So maybe you might want to read it again.
Okay.
Just, first thing that hit you and I both do this with the
Yep.
wording. What appears to me in this policy that was just passed, because it has to be passed, is this paragraph on page 3 of 3, all in red, about competitive foods, which is a strange terminology to begin with, making foods competitive. But I looked it up, and competing foods might work, but competitive, it's what's used in the policy. It's very comprehensive, and the question I've got is Radnor even following this to begin with? I mean, we're talking about smart snacks, and the items that, I just quickly looked up the nutrition guidelines in this competitive food bit. Smart foods, all the vending machines and all the other areas food that's competing with the regular lunch program, are they smart foods in Radnor? Before you sign on to this, if there are clubs that want to sell food, there's only one that's allowed to sell per day. Are those rules and regulation? It just appeared to me to be extremely comprehensive. So before agreeing to go ahead with this policy, is Radnor really following that one paragraph? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? All right, seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you. Oh, our next meeting will be December 5th. Thank you.